The Talented Mr. Ripley by Patricia Highsmith, Chapter 16. He waited after all until nearly 8, because around 7 there were always more people coming in and out of the house than at other times. At 10 to 8 he strolled downstairs to make sure that Senora Buffy was not pottering around in the hall and that her door was not open, and to make sure there really was no one in Freddy's car, though he had gone down in the middle of the afternoon to look at the car and see if it was Freddy's. He tossed Freddy's polo coat into the back seat. He came back upstairs, knelt down, and pulled Freddy's arm around his neck, set his teeth, and lifted. He staggered, jerking the flaccid weight higher on his shoulder. He had lifted Freddy earlier that afternoon just to see if he could, and he had seemed barely able to walk 2 steps in the room with Freddy's pounds pressing his own feet against the floor. And Freddy was exactly as heavy now, but the difference was that he knew he had to get him out now. He let Freddy's feet drag to release some of his weight, managed to pull his door shut with his elbow, then began to descend the stairs. Halfway down the first flight he stopped, hearing someone come out of an apartment on the second floor. He waited until the person had gone down the stairs and out the front door, then recommenced his slow bumping descent. He had pulled a hat of Dickie's well down over Freddy's head so that the blood-stained hair would not show. On a mixture of gin and Pernod, which he had been drinking for the last hour, Tom had gotten himself to a precisely calculated state of intoxication in which he thought he could move with a certain nonchalance and smoothness, and at the same time be courageous and even foolhardy enough to take chances without flinching. The first chance, the worst thing that could happen, was that he might simply collapse under Freddy's weight before he got him to the car. He had sworn that he would not stop to rest going down the stairs. He didn't, and nobody else came out of any of the apartments, and nobody came in the front door. During the hours upstairs, Tom had imagined so tortuously everything that might happen. Senora Buffy or her husband coming out of their apartment just as he reached the bottom of the stairs, or himself fainting so that both he and Freddy would be discovered sprawled on the stairs together, or being unable to pick Freddy up again if he had to put him down to rest. Imagined it all with such intensity, writhing upstairs in his apartment, that to have descended all of the stairs without a single one of his imaginings happening made him feel he was gliding down under a magical protection of some kind, with ease in spite of the mass on his shoulder. He looked out the glass of the 2 front doors. The street looked normal. A man was walking on the opposite sidewalk, but there was always someone walking on one sidewalk or the other. He opened the first door with one hand, kicked it aside, and dragged Freddy's feet through. Between the doors, he shifted Freddy to the other shoulder, rolling his head under Freddy's body, and for a second a certain pride went through him at his own strength, until the ache in his relaxing arm staggered him with its pain. The arm was too tired even to circle Freddy's body. He set his teeth harder and staggered down the 4 front steps, banging his hip against the stone newel post. A man approaching him on the sidewalk slowed his steps as if he were going to stop, but he went on. If anyone came over, Tom thought, he would blow such a breath of Pernod in his face that there wouldn't be any reason to ask what was the matter. Damn them, damn them, damn them, he said to himself as he jolted down the curb. Passers-by, innocent passers-by, 4 of them now, but only 2 of them so much as glanced at him, he thought. He paused a moment for a car to pass. Then, with a few quick steps and a heave, he thrust Freddy's head and one shoulder through the open window of the car, far enough that he could brace Freddy's body with his own body while he got his breath. He looked around, under the glow of light from the street lamp across the street, into the shadows in front of his own apartment house. At that instant, the Buffy's youngest boy ran out of the door and down the sidewalk without looking in Tom's direction. Then a man crossing the street walked within a yard of the car with only a brief and faintly surprised look at Freddy's bent figure, which did look almost natural now, Tom thought. Practically as if Freddy were only leaning into the car talking to someone. Only he really didn't look quite natural, Tom knew, but that was the advantage of Europe, he thought. Nobody helped anybody. Nobody meddled. If this had been America, "Could I help you?" a voice asked in Italian. No, grazie," Tom replied with drunken good cheer. "I know where he lives," he added in mumbled English. The man nodded, smiling a little too, and walked on. A tall, thin man in a thin overcoat, hatless, with a mustache. Tom hoped he wouldn't remember the car. Tom swung Freddy out on the door, pulled him around the door and onto the car seat, came around the car and pulled Freddy into the seat beside the driver's seat. Then he put on the pair of brown leather gloves he had stuck into his overcoat pocket. He put Freddy's key into the dashboard. The car started obediently. They were off. Down the hill to the Via Veneto, past the American Library, over to the Piazza Venezia, past the balcony on which Mussolini used to stand to make his speeches, past the gargantuan Victor Emmanuel Monument, and through the Forum, past the Colosseum, a grand tour of Rome that Freddy could not appreciate at all. It was just as if Freddy was sleeping beside him, as sometimes people did sleep when you wanted to show them scenery. The Via Appia Antica stretched out before him, gray and ancient in the soft lights of its infrequent lamps. Black fragments of tombs rose up on either side of the road, silhouetted against the still not quite dark sky. There was more darkness than light, and only a single car ahead coming this way. Not many people chose to take a ride in such a bumpy, gloomy road after dark in the month of January, except perhaps lovers. The approaching car passed him. Tom began to look around for the right spot. Freddy ought to have a handsome tomb to lie behind, he thought. There was a spot ahead with 3 or 4 trees near the edge of the road, and doubtless a tomb behind them or part of a tomb. Tom pulled off the road by the trees and shut off his lights. He waited a moment, looking at both ends of the straight empty road. Freddy was still as limp as a rubber doll. What was all this about rigor mortis? He dragged the limp body roughly now, scraping the face in the dirt, behind the last tree and behind the little remnant of tomb that was only a 4-foot-high jagged arc of wall, but which was probably a remnant of the tomb of a patrician, Tom thought, and quite enough for this pig. Tom cursed his ugly weight and kicked him suddenly in the chin. He was tired to the point of crying, sick of the sight of Freddie Miles, and the moment when he could turn his back on him for the last time seemed never to come. There was still the goddamn coat. Tom went back to the car to get it. The ground was hard and dry, he noticed as he walked back, and should not leave any traces of his steps. He flung the coat down beside the body and turned away quickly and walked back to the car in his numb, staggering legs and turned the car around toward Rome again. As he drove, he wiped the outside of the car door with his gloved hand to get the fingerprints off, the only place he had touched the car before he put his gloves on, he thought. On the street that curved up to the American Express opposite the Florida nightclub, he parked the car and got out and left it with the keys in the dashboard. He still had Freddy's wallet in his pocket, though he had transferred the Italian money to his own billfold and had burned a Swiss 20-franc note and some Austrian shilling notes in his apartment. Now he took the wallet out of his pocket, and as he passed a sewer grate, he leaned down and dropped it in. There were only 2 things wrong, he thought, as he walked toward his house. Robbers would logically have taken the polo coat because it was a good one, and also the passport, which was still in the overcoat pocket. But not every robber was logical, he thought, maybe especially an Italian robber, and not every murderer was logical either. His mind drifted back to the conversation with Freddy, an Italian fellow, just a young kid. Somebody had followed him home at some time, Tom thought, because he hadn't told anybody where he lived. It shamed him. Maybe 2 or 3 delivery boys might know where he lived, but a delivery boy wouldn't be sitting in a place like the Cafe Greco. It shamed him and made him shrink inside his overcoat. He imagined a dark, panting young face following him home, staring up to see which window had lighted up after he had gone in. Tom hunched in his overcoat and walked faster as if he were fleeing a sick, passionate pursuer.